This is Jim Mulhern at the Plymouth Gym on socials, and I thank you. This show is an escape from work and business, and mostly an escape from politics. We talk humor and music to artists, writers, creatives, broadcasters, talented people who impact us. And we get a few things out of the way first. Talk with our great guest today. And at the end, we handle some necessary disclaimers and we end the frivolity. On today's show, the great writer, musician, and expert musicologist, Paul Myers. And I'm going to give him a proper introduction if it kills me. But before my guest, I generally get a few things out of the way. And today I'm just going to amend that. I just want to get one thing out of the way so we can spend most of the time with Paul. So getting one thing out of the way, on previous shows, I brought this to your attention. The dancing lady sashaying through huge parks, fountains, picnics, and almost hurdling the Grand Canyon, all to prove that she's in daily control of her A1C. Remember? Well, it was time for America's Got More diabetic talent. And so these guys have now brought in an attractive African-American gentleman into the picture. And let's just say he's upping the ante, blood sugar watchers. He's mowing the lawn. He's trimming the boxwoods with a manual trimmer, mind you, all while singing, being in step with his diabetic answers. He's doing it all, almost flaunting it, daring you to say that there's a new A1C sheriff in town and his name is commercial actor getting a fat check. Well, call me impressed. He's practically a pharmaceutical pushing Joel Grey. I don't know whether to check my sugar or wind my watch, as the old saying goes, but I can't go there with him. My medicine cabinet is full of gingivitis meds, Xanax, and off-brand Botox. I'm not getting diabetes. So I'm glad to get that out of the way. I'm feeling better about it all, and on with the show. So, all right, before I formally introduce Paul, I must read this spot, as you know, and share with you that And I Thank You show is brought to you this week by Dynamic Weight Loss Products. Well, summer is over and we're into fall. And if you're like me, you're trying to take a few pounds off, get flannel ready. But how many times have you stepped onto the scale only for it to read one at a time? Have you too tried to fit into last year's jeans, only to have that top button jettison at such a velocity so as to take out the remaining good eye of that old cat? Well, that would be illegal in most states, but I digress. This is where dynamic weight loss comes in. Yes, Dynamic Weight Loss Products of Outer Pinckney is taking the alternative weight loss industry by storm. Dynamic has gone back to nature to help you get back into fighting shape or peacemaking shape, depending on how many boat flags you own. Regardless, Dynamic has found that if you can curb your appetite, you can get results. And what better way to curb your appetite than with ingredients that come from nature, such as cocoa leaves and cacti? 2 tabs in the morning and 2 at dinner, and you'll marvel at your increased heart rate, decreased appetite, and potential for surprise visions. Owner Herb Skim promises that you'll have the energy of a Colombian marching band and the light show of the Jefferson airplane. Not everyone will have the same weight loss results, but all will have quite a ride. Dynamic laughs at Ozempic and Wegovy with their expensive commercials, paid actors, and demonstrable results. Dynamic asks you, are you better off now than when you were a slim teen and Bon Jovi had a nest of metal hair? Surely not, and Dynamic encourages you to take the trip. Dynamic weight loss products can be found at select crystal shops, YouTube commercials that start up with, "What's up, guys?" and on the web at highspeedweightloss.com. Dynamic should be taken with food, but not poppy seed bagels or whole poppies. Your weight loss results may vary, but you should have little problem staying awake. Dynamic weight loss products need not necessarily be taken near a water closet, but it can't hurt. Dynamic weight loss products are not FDA approved, but are NBA approved, if you know what I mean. Dynamic no longer does product testing on animals since that unfortunate ferret explosion, which was settled out of court. Dynamic weight loss products can be favorably compared to Bolivian marching powder, but are not made in Bolivia. And lastly, dynamic weight loss products is a division of Dynamic Industries. Say what you will, it's dynamic. And I thank you. Now, I'm rubbing my hands together, on with the show. So, my guest today is Paul Myers. And it could be very cheesy to call somebody a Renaissance man, but words matter. And I get to talk to one today. Paul is a musician, songwriter, author, and deep expert on popular music and humor. Paul has written the authorized biography of the great band Barenaked Ladies, easy for me to say, entitled Barenaked Ladies, Public Stunts, Private Stories. Paul then went on to write a biography on Long John Baldry, which I will be purchasing soon, entitled It Ain't Easy, Long John Baldry and the Birth of the British Blues. Paul also penned the script for the documentary on him entitled Long John Baldry in the Shadow of the Blues. Paul's third book, which I just read and could not put down, is A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the studio. Paul's most recent book is the authorized biography of the incredible comedy troupe Kids in the Hall, entitled Kids in the Hall, One Dumb Guy. Paul is also a songwriter, musician, and performer. Check out, like I did, the album Inner Sunset by The Paul and John, his group with bandmate John Mormon. So, and lastly, every week, music fiends like myself and probably many of you can get a dose of interviews and really insightful conversation about new releases on the Record Store Day podcast that Paul writes, has scored the music, the interstitial music, and he hosts the show. It's simply a treat. Look up the Record Store Day podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And Paul, welcome to the show, and thank you for sitting through that interminable introduction.
No, I just don't know what to do with myself in the green room. But what a lovely list of credits you gave me there, and a nice introduction. And I hope I get a job after that resume. It was such a good list of everything I've done. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I became a follower and a fan of yours on the Hellscape, formerly known as Twitter. And it's really the only good thing about that place is that it was a great forum for information and sharing ideas. But I found you and your great posts and Record Store Day podcast. So I'm thankful for that place.
Thank you. It's pull my ears. I still hold the account there, and I still post like 8% of my time there. But I'm over at Threads, also at Pull My Ears. That is PULMYEARS, by the way. It's an anagram of Paul Myers.
It is.
Since awesome. What I do, I tend to pull people's ears, so it's perfect with one L. Okay, but anyway,
people love it when you pull their ears.
Apparently, they do.
My ears. That's great.
Yes, and I always think of Carol Burnett, who used to pull her own ear at the end of every show, but that's really not what it's based on. Okay,
love it. So the show is all about conversations with the creatives, and you, Paul, are a definition of one, musician and writer, and really want to get into your process, right? Talk about your books, talk about your process, and talk about your music too, and then talk about the podcast as well. This is your life. And then do some no thank you on artists and things that I throw at you and get your take.
Will my 6th grade teacher be here? That's what I just want to make sure.
Oh, geez.
You don't pull out anyone from my past.
Stick around to find out.
Oh, no. Okay, well, I just want to say I'm sorry about the pet hamster. Okay, but continue.
Tune in for the whole show to see. So you were born, if Wiki is correct, in 1960 in Toronto. And
that's right, Toronto, Canada.
We came up. I was born in 1964 in Detroit area, where I'm talking to you from. And
Great Lakes in the house.
Yeah, right on. So, and I really feel like we came up in the greatest time for music. And I always think about, and I wanted to ask you, when you grew up, was there music playing in the house?
Yes. I will say, by the way, the greatest time for music is whatever time you grew up in.
True.
So you will say that about your own era, but I didn't experience Kendrick Lamar and Prince until much later in my life, so I don't know about that. There was music in the house, not a musical instrument, but both my parents, anyone who's ever heard one of my podcasts or read anything I've written knows that my family, my parents, both my mom and dad are from Liverpool, England, and they didn't necessarily love rock and roll, but they knew the Beatles were from Liverpool, and therefore the Beatles were on in the house and we considered them almost family. And honest to God, my parents and all my uncles and aunties back in England talk like the Beatles. So it was very much impressed upon me that music and also English comedy, because my dad loved English comedy. So music and comedy, and so obviously the music of Spike Jones too, an American guy who made like sound effects records practically.
Yes.
There was a lot of my dad played a lot of cool records, and the one thing he loved was Django Reinhardt, the jazz
Oh yeah.
from the World War II era, and he it was the first swing jazz I'd ever heard was Django Reinhardt and Stephen Grappelli. So at the same time as the Beatles and all that, and AM radio was my friend. So and what I love too is, sorry for the long answers here,
No.
AM radio at the time I grew up, it was not uncommon to hear how do I say this? Within popular music, the genres were flowing. So it was Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but also Stevie Wonder and Curtis Mayfield, but also even like hard rock bands were on the radio. And then
Yeah.
FM radio was even more deep. So you get Bowie and Zeppelin and all those things. But, the charts were really, as they say, eclectic. So, so I just remember one year when Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, George Harrison's solo single "My Sweet Lord," they're all on the same chart the same week, and that wasn't like a black chart or a white chart. That was just a music chart, and those were great
Right.
songs. And Sly and the Family Stone. So I was not told that I was listening to black music. I was just listening to music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's there's something about that, and I think we're almost back to that with. I do a show about record stores, but I will say that the value of streaming is that um, there's no boundaries. People can
Right.
listen to whatever they want, and the only music they like is good music. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And good music is whatever they like. So, so,
Yeah. It doesn't
so
feel so
genres are being
categorized.
blurred. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned Beatles. First Beatles song that hit you, if you
Oh,
can say.
yes, I think it was "I Want to Hold Your Hand"
Okay.
because I when I hear that I feel a weird sensibility like, oh yeah, that was, and then She Loves You shortly after that.
Okay.
So but that mania, that magic of the harmonies, the blends, and the sort of thundering drums of Ringo Starr with those beautiful ascending like yeah 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 but also I Want to Hold Your Hand had that guttural excitement of the woos and high pitched screams, and then seeing how popular they were with the ladies, who much older than me. They were probably 12 and 13.
Sure.
So what I could see what Beatlemania was doing, and it kind of made me want to do that. Like I think deep down the reason I picked up a guitar, I couldn't get one for the first 7 years, but
Yeah.
around the age of 14, I managed to ask my parents for a secondhand guitar and took lessons. They said I had to take lessons, so I learned a year of guitar so I could write chords.
Good on you. For me on Beatles, it was Please Please Me. And
Oh yeah,
I just have
same
that
era.
memory of older brothers and sisters. It just felt like that 45 and the album played over and over. Just it was almost the song track of my young childhood. It was great having older brothers and sisters in that regard.
Yeah,
Um,
that one era of all the like it was all within a year that those
yeah,
singles were all happening, and they all had the same mania to them. They had the same
yes,
instant party when you put them on. There was something like crazy going on. It
yeah.
was yeah, kind of a big deal.
First concert.
Okay, the first concert I ever got to go to, my mom took me to an outdoor equivalent to a state park. There was a place in Toronto called the Ontario Place Forum. It was an outdoor venue with a roof over it, but it was like a amphitheater in a circle,
Yep.
And the bands you probably didn't know, there were bands that were big in Canada at the time on the radio. One was called the Stampeders.
Okay.
The Stampeders were a three-piece rock group with a slight country bent because they were from Calgary.
I was going to
And
ask if they were from Calgary. Yes.
yeah, they were, but they had like they actually did have an American hit record called "Sweet City Woman" that kind of got played on regional
Yeah.
radio. But they were one of the first. And again, this is like that thing when you're a kid and you go, "Wow, they're from Canada," and like so you start to think, "Wow, I'm gonna be a fan of them because they make good songs, but also because it means that someone can be in a band from Canada."
Yes.
The opening act was the Poppy Family, which is a guy named Terry Jacks and his sister Susan Jacks,
Oh
Cherry
gosh.
Jacks later had a solo single called Seasons in the
Seasons in the
Sun.
Sun.
It was an
Yes.
international hit also. So
Yes.
that was my first concert that my mom took me. The first concert I went to on my own, I think, was Rush at Maple Leaf Gardens, which was
Wow.
where the Toronto Maple Leafs played. So I thought
Yep.
it was kind of interesting to be in that building to see Rush. They were locals too. So
Awesome. So, um, so many questions, Paul.
I'm here.
Yeah. So, because I really want to talk to you about artists too, and your process. You got into journalism in Toronto, and then in TV and radio, and then somewhere in that sequence, you went west. You ended up in Vancouver. Talk a little bit about your early career in journalism and TV and radio.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me not to tell the whole life story, but in Toronto,
Yeah.
I was really promoting being in my band, the Gravelberries, which, yes, we did get our name from the Flintstones. And we
Awesome.
put out an independent single. The Gravelberries had an album called Bowl of Globes because there was a bowl of little globe patio lights on the cover. Really the only reason. And I think I was inspired by Robin Hitchcock's Globe of Frogs,
Nice.
which I have told him that, and I don't think he was impressed. But anyway, he's a good guy, but I don't know if that's maybe he was impressed. I don't know. So as the band couldn't keep together, and it was like kind of my thing, so it was really hard to hold it together because nobody was getting paid, but I was getting any glory that there was. And I also somehow accidentally started writing. I didn't think I was a writer. I never studied it. I mean, that might frustrate some people because I've been published several times, but what happened was I think I paid attention to the things I like to read.
Sure.
And there was everyone knows what an op-ed is, right? Like, so I wrote a letter to the editor about an event that happened. No, there was a kid had gone missing at a lake,
Yeah.
and everybody made a human chain to find the kid, and it was the grossest, weirdest thing because we had to walk through the water hoping kind of not to kick the kid, like,
Right.
and then it turns out the kid was found alive at a different woods, like one over from this park. So we were
Wow.
all relieved. But what had happened in that moment, and I have to tell that story just to tell you why I wrote about it. I had never experienced a situation like this where everybody's having their own private picnics at this lake. All of a sudden, everyone was together. Think of New York after 9/11, but in a
Right.
very microcosmic way, right? So everybody, so I was so impressed with this idea that when there's danger and we all feel connected as a group, and this is before social media, by the way, that I
For
wrote this.
sure.
But suddenly, all these people who have their own myopic interests suddenly all came together, made a human chain to find this kid. And then after they found the kid, everyone just split up. Nobody said, "Hey, let's talk again," no, or let's all come over to each other's table. No. So what was is there was a facade that we were not a community, or there, yeah, we were a community, but then we didn't want to identify as a community when there wasn't any reason to.
Yeah.
So I wrote an op-ed to the Globe and Mail, which is like the New York Times in Canada in the sense that people read
Yes.
it outside of Toronto. And I got good feedback from it. And someone said, you put, the editor helped me. And then I wrote an article for the Globe and Mail about my friend Ron Sexsmith, who is a singer-songwriter that I really like, a friend of mine who's so much better than all of us. And we just went
Yes.
to the point where we couldn't even be competitive and jealous because it was like, I'm a terrible writer compared to this guy. You guys should hear him. Elvis Costello had mentioned him in a magazine article. So I thought, I'm going to write a story about how great this guy is and how he's getting international success, even though it was just a small bit of success at the time. And that got published. And so suddenly I was a music journalist. And then I wrote a story about Robert Moog, the inventor of the synthesizer. And I interviewed Robert Moog.
Right.
And, and it was like, wow, I like this writing thing. And when I was in the Gravel Bears, I'd been writing a band newsletter, which was literally a mailer. It was a two-sided photocopy. And
Yes.
I was so into this thing. It was called the Gravelberry Pie. And and I was so into writing that sometimes I would write fictional letters to the editor.
Yes.
And I was so into writing that I was like really into it. But I still didn't think that I thought I didn't go to college to be a writer. I didn't go to college at all. I thought I can't be a writer. You don't just say you're a writer, right? I mean, but here's the thing. I've been told since a writer writes and a writer listens to feedback, a writer keeps writing. And then if you keep writing, there's a law of averages that you're going to get at least better. You might not have talent, but who knows? Who cares? By that point, you've written a lot. And so then it was the weirdest thing. The Barenaked Ladies, also on our scene,
Yeah.
One week they opened for us, the Gravelberries, and
They
then
opened for you?
yes, because they were just starting out. We
Okay.
loved them. We love them. I
Oh,
still friends with them to this day.
what's
Stephen
not to
King,
love? Yeah.
but they were just smart, intelligent guys. And again, I should have been jealous because they were young, smart kids coming up from nowhere.
Yeah.
Their rapid rise was so rapid that the next time they were supposed to open for us, we had no choice but to say, okay, we booked this months ago. You guys are the headliners. We'll open for you because we're happy to be part of your crowd. And then, okay, so then cut to a few years later, they're touring machine through the Midwest of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
They're literally doing it the old-fashioned way, one college at a time, right?
Hmm.
They get the big push from Warner's, and I'm living in San Francisco by this time because my wife had a job there.
Okay.
And that's a big story, I guess. But so suddenly we're on the West Coast. That explains that.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I get a call from Tyler, the drummer in the Barenaked Ladies, and he says, "We want you to write a bio for us." And I thought it was going to be like a one-page, two-page bio.
Right. As it would
And
be.
they said, "No, we're writing an autobiography, but we're five guys and we can't decide who's going to write it. So we thought, why don't we have some guy write essentially our autobiography, be the designated writer?" And they really liked something I'd written in actually one of the Globe and Mail articles. And so they said they had a book deal with their management company, had a publishing wing. So suddenly I had a built-in offer to write a book for, essentially for network management in Vancouver. And the editor there was super help. Catherine France was super helpful. I said, "I don't know how to be a writer. They want me to be a writer." She goes, "I'll walk you through it." And I literally,
A great
there were
editor.
days when I had to call her just to be talked down.
Yes. Yes.
And I eventually did all the work, and the book came out. It was okay. I think it was okay. I don't know. I'm scared to read it now, but it did okay. And then that book got after about a year later, it got reissued in America with a different cover on Simon and Schuster's imprint. So
Okay.
suddenly I had a book out in America with a wing of Simon and Schuster, and again, never had an ambition to be a writer. So then I start pitching ideas to people. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And it still didn't happen for a long time. But by this time, I'd moved to Vancouver, and the musician Long John Baldry was from England, who discovered Elton John. Rod Stewart was kind of the uncredited father of the British blues,
Yes.
and actually one of the white guy who brought blues to England. That American black blues to England. Okay,
Yep.
and he always had a huge reference for black music. He never pretended that he made up the blues or anything like that. So if you think about the British wave of music that I grew up listening to, like Led
Yes.
Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, the Yardbirds, all those guys, Rolling Stones,
Yep.
all those guys, he was a friend of theirs. John Baldry, a white 6'7" gay Englishman. Okay, just so you know that there's a lot of descriptors for him, and he spoke like this. He was a very colorful character. I only met him once. He lived in Vancouver at this point,
Okay.
and he was like the resident and old guy rock star.
Sure.
So a publisher, I had pitched a book about someone else. Okay. And it's actually a book that I'm still pitching that I won't talk about yet because we're very close this year to doing it. But this was going on 20 years ago, I think. Maybe, yeah, 20 years ago. So I pitched this idea, and the guy from Vancouver says, the publisher, he says, "Okay, that's good, but what do you know about Long John Baldry?" And I said, "Well, I just met him once, and he was kind of sickly at the time, and
Okay.
and as it turns out, he died like of like gout related illnesses and eventually kind of a pneumonia type thing. He died in Vancouver Hospital, and he said, he just passed away. And I said, "Yeah, I know. I did get to meet him the one time." He goes, "What do you know about his story?" I said, "Well, he discovered Elton John. He did that." He goes, "Oh, really? All that? I thought he was just like a cool, colorful character." I said, "No, I could tell you tons." And he goes, "Why don't you write a book about him?" So again, another fell from heaven. And again, maybe this is the message for someone starting out.
Yeah.
Um, you might get a rejection, but you might get another opportunity that you don't think you wanted to do, but then think about how you could make it your own. And
Right.
I will tell you that without name dropping, one of my mentors who I've since become friends with is a writer you may have heard of, who's also a director named Cameron Crowe.
Oh, yes.
And Cameron, one of my heroes, wrote for Rolling Stone. I think still writes for Rolling Stone, does liner notes for Joni Mitchell, as well as still doing TV and film work. I was lucky enough to email him about one of these gigs that I was offered, and I said, I don't know anything about that artist. I don't know. And he goes, what can you bring to it that's you?
Mm,
And he said, what can you bring to it that's you? And tell them that. Tell the person offering you the job that you want to bring it this way, and then you'll find the passion to do the thing the way you want to do it, and they'll get something that they didn't even know they needed, right? And like, thank you, Cameron Crowe. That's the only reason I name drop him, besides the fact that I'm very happy that he came into my life. But
for sure.
the reason I would name drop him is that you should know that Cameron Crowe gives good advice. Like that he is a mentor to me in that sense of the word. Anyway, I don't know if I've rambled on here, but this is how my career started happening, and it also kind of explains how I ended up in the West Coast.
It's so great, Paul, because in looking at the books you've written and doing some research, the Baldry story is fascinating. So for anyone who's like us, I say us, anybody who grew up during that time, what a touchstone for so many bands and artists. I read, if the Wikipedia is right on Baldry, I should read your book, Paul. I haven't gotten it yet, but that
It's hard to find right now, by the way, because
is it.
I just want to say that it's out of print because the company it's a Vancouver company, and
Yeah.
they kind of didn't renew it, and I got the rights back. So I own
Okay.
the rights, and I haven't
Got it.
decided if I want to self-publish it or try and get a new issue out with another publisher. It's just just
Okay.
if you find it, it might actually be a little bit more expensive than it was. But I mean, yeah, go ahead though.
No, no, no. I'm sure you will send me when it gets reprinted. But and the Todd book was tough too to get as well. But my point of the Baldry story was just in a little bit of research, people don't know that Elton John, the John is named after John Baldry, correct?
Yes, that's
Reg
true. Yeah.
Dwight took that name. He was so influential on him and so many others. It's just it's one of those people who we never found out about because he wasn't he launched a thousand ships, as they say. And
Yeah, I do want to say one thing is that if you ever watch the movie Rocket Man about Elton John, for some reason Elton John agreed to let the filmmakers make up a new story about the word John in his name, because in the movie the character looks up at the poster of John Lennon and says, "That's it. That'll be my last name is John."
oh,
And Elton John, I have him on tape somewhere telling me that it was for John Baldry because he had started playing keyboards in John Baldry's band
right,
along with a guy named Elton Dean. Elton Dean was in the band. So he liked
right.
the name Elton because it was an original name. And then he just, although I think Reg Dwight, if he'd come out today, it would have been Reg Dwight. I think in those days people came up with stage names they didn't need to. But
Sure.
anyway,
And you just said something a moment ago that was so, because I had it written in my notes I want to ask you about, because it was all about what you just talked about, how you moved to that next subject, and a lot of it was serendipitous, right? And it turned out great for you.
absolutely. Yeah.
But I had written down writer's right, and that's you, right? So Baldry, then we don't have to go through the sequence, but the next one was the Todd book, right? And
Yeah.
and I just want to say, deep into reading that book right now, a lifelong Todd Rundgren fan. I don't know how many times I've seen Todd. I've got the shirts and everything else, but I couldn't have been a bigger fan and still am. That was an exhaustive book you wrote. And as I read that with the level of detail, how long did it take you to research and write that book?
Oh man. Probably all in about 2 years, maybe a year and a half of research, and
Yeah.
then a crazy breakneck speed. Um, I mean, let me tell you though, this was the first book I ever wrote that I had uh what's the word? That was my concept. Like
Yeah.
I designed it. I had designed the whole thing, and I I wanted it to be okay. So it started with me being at a party and
Yeah.
telling someone, Todd Rundgren, the guy who does "Hello, It's Me," and some people would from a certain era would know he had this big album called Something Anything that had "Hello, It's Me," "I Saw the Light," and a lot of other big pop tunes like "It Wouldn't Have Made Any Difference." And then other people knew him from Bang the Drum All Day, which was a
Right.
sort of sports anthem at that point. And still other people might have just known him as okay, then I said, but he's also a producer. And if you look at the credits for Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf, which was
Right.
at the time one of the biggest selling albums of all time, Todd Rundgren, Patti Smith, Wave, he produced, XTC Skylarking, he produced, Grand Funk Railroad's We're an American Band, he produced, Badfinger's Straight Up album, he produced.
Baby Blue.
He engineered, yeah, exactly. Like if you watch no spoiler here, but the final episode of Breaking Bad, you hear Baby Blue, a track that Todd Rundgren produced. Um, he also worked with the band, the group The Band, on
Yes.
Stage Fright. Like, so he
Yep.
was the guy who recorded the sessions for Stage Fright. Like they were kind of unproducible at that point. So I wouldn't say he produced it, but this guy has been around. And I suddenly thought, I don't know if you remember, Woody Allen had a film called Zelig.
Yep.
And the idea about Zelig was that it was a fictional character who popped up in history somehow undetected, that at every juncture of humanity, that guy was there. And I started to think, I love Zeligs like John Baldry.
Yeah.
I love recurring characters who you didn't realize were there. And John Baldry was one of them. And then Todd Rundgren, especially so. And then I
Yes.
thought, how come nobody talks about how much Todd Rundgren has done that is like, the New York Dolls first album. And later on he did one of their reunion albums. The first New York Dolls album is considered a seminal album for punk and glam people like Kiss and all those people, even as
Yep.
well as, sort of like the punk rock era.
Morrissey.
Yeah, yeah. Morrissey
Mhm.
loved the New York Dolls. He wouldn't be doing what he did with the Smiths if it wasn't for David Johansen and all those things. Okay, so Todd Rundgren's behind all those records, right? So
Yes.
I thought, here's what I want to do. I want to do a story. What I find interesting in all of that was not him necessarily as a songwriter, even though he's a great songwriter, but the fact that he is a self-recording producer of his own music, but he
Mhm.
also produces all these other people's records. So I thought where he really should be celebrated at this time, at that book, was the studio. So
Yes.
in one of his records, he has a thing where he says, he actually does a little thing about recording, and he talks to the audience and he goes, "I'm going to play a little game now. It's called Sounds from the Studio." And that's how he says it. And he does a little thing where he shows all the things that can go wrong on a record, hum and hiss and all that stuff. Okay, it's very funny. It's called
Yeah.
Intro. It's on one of the sides of Something Anything.
Yep.
Now, I pitched this idea as a book, Todd Rundgren Sounds from the Studio. And then the editors thought, well, the book's kind of about how he's a wizard and a rock star, and he has an album called A Wizard, a True Star. So that's why we called it A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio. And the last thing I'll say is, I know it's not like I'm selling this book that's already over 10 years old, but the idea was I talked to Todd in a series of master interviews where we talk about him in the studio with his own work and with other people.
Right.
Then I go get interviews with XTC, Patti Smith, the New York Dolls, Hall and Oates,
Yes.
and and Meatloaf and Jim Steinman. And I go and I get interviews of their experience, and then I make it a narrative. So I fold in all the interviews as though everyone's just accessible at the same time. And Patty was great. Like Patty, that was just the getting that interview was the biggest story of my
Right.
life at the time. Sitting in Greenwich Village at a cafe with Patty Smith, praising Todd Rundgren and telling me elements of her biography that I wouldn't hear about until her own book, Just Kids, came out.
Right.
And she told me some of those stories as part of the Todd Rundgren story. And just so this book, even if no one ever saw it, was a success for me because it was a proof of concept, a passion project that I wanted to see happen. And I finally did it and I got it done. Then it had a life of its own. Recording studio people would send me photographs of my book on their console, their recording console. People
Wow.
in tour buses would tell me musicians love the stories. And I guess my musician training or experience, uh, I've been told this that I bring a lot of understanding to it just by the nature of the way I editorialize. I kind of go, he had a sound check that day, so he was busy, or he was tired he was tired after doing press in the morning. Things that I know about just from my own life, but also from the millions of musicians I chat with as friends, right?
You know what's
So
so you know
that's
what's
where
so,
my voice came out, you see.
it's great. And you know what's a tribute to you about that book too is that it's journalistic. the interviews with some of those people were, this guy was an egotistical pain in the ass. Some of the people he produced could not stand him. But I think to a band in the book thus far, and I haven't finished it yet,
Mm-hmm.
they all laud him as being a wizard,
Yeah.
a guy who could get the best sound and could herd those cats and get them to produce the stories about him just trying to produce the band. They all of these artists had different approaches and styles and bedtimes and creative times, and it was just such a treat to read it because it was it was the unvarnished truth, right? Half of these guys couldn't stand him, but they all respected him at the end because he was so talented. And it just struck me too. People are all different, but he seems to be such a Mensa level intellect in terms of his ability to engineer things, and just he was such a whiz kid, but
Yeah.
also was so creative and so musical, and willed himself to be a great guitar player and a wonderful singer. What you shared in the book that was really interesting to me was how many times he sang layer after layer after layer of background vocals for many of these bands, not all of them, but for
Yeah.
some of them, because he just knew how to make vocal layering sound so great, and he was such a good singer. It's just an amazing book. Amazing book,
I just want
amazing
to
talent.
I want to say that Lenny Kaye,
Yeah,
who you know is a writer, but also as the Patti
from Patti
Smith group
Smith. Yeah.
guitarist. Lenny Kaye, I'm sitting there in New York City with Lenny Kaye in his he has a pied-à-terre apartment in St. Mark's Place, or he had at the time. I don't know if he still does. And he sits there and he goes, "Let me tell you what Todd Rundgren told me." He said, "If as an artist, if he's producing you as an artist, he says, if you know what you want musically, I'll help you get it.
Hmm.
If you don't know what you want, I'll do it."
I'll
So
do it.
so so his whole thing is he doesn't want to exert his personality on something or sing on the record. He just wants you to know what you want to do. And if you're having a hard time deciding, his job is also to tip the scales.
Right.
Now, some people don't like that. Some people are told to work with Todd Rundgren at the time because their label said you need a name American producer, and he was the one that they chose, or
Yeah.
that he's the one that was available. And at the time, a lot of the records he made in the 80s, he wasn't necessarily as ubiquitous with some people anymore. In the 70s, he had done Badfinger and Grand Funk, and suddenly everybody wanted him.
Right.
So he was busy. And then when he did Meatloaf, nobody else would take the record on except Todd Rundgren. So it was kind of like it's a two-way street. So
Yes.
Todd Rundgren he fronted the bills to make the Meatloaf record out of his pocket, and then when it paid off, he actually made a lot of money from it, which he later put into a video. Spoiler alert: he put it
Yeah.
into a video studio in the 80s that was a black hole of a money pit.
Oh, sure.
But he was also an innovator in video, and he is that guy.
Yes.
I would say he's at times he's almost like a savant. I mean, that's not to say he doesn't understand what his intellect is, but he is an intuitive intellectual,
Hmm.
and he will read up on something and kind of try and get the nuts and bolts of it, and then he'll figure out how to make something creative and impulsive out of that, which
Right.
is that, and he's an original. I mean, sometimes people don't like what he does all the time, and he's kind of fine with it because that's how it is. He has to make art for himself. And so he's been lucky sometimes that he's had money from other things to fund the things that he wanted to do that didn't sell.
Right.
So,
Right.
but enough about Todd.
Yeah. Enough about Todd. Let's talk more about Paul. No, I
Yes.
I was
No, I'm
so
just kidding. I'm just
no,
kidding.
no, no. And I know we're flying through it, so I want to be respectful of your time too. Um, as I looked into your music, I saw this terrific album you put out called um, Inner Sunset with your friend John Mormon, and I
Yeah.
streamed it, and I thought, wow, this is so great. And then I just looking into it, I saw also, if this is true in your wiki, Paul, that you had drumming DJ Bonebreak from X and Don
Yeah.
Richardson from Four Non Blondes.
Yeah.
And
Well,
tell
that's
me a
our
little bit
our
about.
live show. Yeah, our
Oh,
live
okay.
show. We would always use different people. Like on the record. Here's
Yeah.
the thing about the record.
Yeah. Who was
So
on the record?
John Mormon and I have
Yep.
very similar. I'll give you a little background on both of us. Okay, so John Mormon is originally from Washington, D.C., right?
Okay.
The D.C. area. Okay. He grew up listening to the same Elvis Costello, Beatles, and
Yeah.
all the indie rock that we all loved. And he's a guitar player. I'm a guitar player. He's a songwriter. I'm a songwriter. He sang lead vocals in his band. I sang lead vocals in my band. The difference is he was also a drummer,
Hmm.
and I don't know how to do the drums. But
Gotcha.
and I think neither of us can play keyboards. Like, well, actually play piano, but we know how to use keyboards.
Sure.
But so we were when I first moved to San Francisco, one of the first jobs I had was I like for a local independent newspaper here, called the Bay Guardian. With some writing experience, I said I'd like to do stories for your music paper. They don't pay a lot, but it's
Right.
go see this band. They said go see this band. It's the John Mormon Band, and they were opening for a group called the Orange Peels, a Bay Area band. They were from the South Bay, and both these bands had a pop sensibility. I would say John at the time, his music reminded me of Marshall Crenshaw,
Yes.
and the Orange Peels were kind of chamber pop, jangly guitars, big melodies.
Got
And
it.
I had the greatest time. It was at a place called the Edinburgh Castle, which I think is not there anymore, but it was at some point it was a notorious San Francisco live band place. Okay. So I wrote this review, and to be honest, I actually had critical notes of both bands about their execution and stuff like that, which I later felt really chagrined because they became my really good friends in the
Your
city.
friends. Yeah.
And then that grew a whole musical community of friends that to this day I'm in touch with all these people, including Alison Faith Levy and there's a bunch of different musicians that I know just through this, Chris Von Snyder, and all these people who are, in some way we all intersect with Chuck Prophet. There's kind of a weird
Yes.
San Francisco thing where we don't really hang out together, but we all know each other. So,
Okay.
um, long story short, John and I were talking about writing songs together for the longest time. So we did a few. And then I moved away to Vancouver for 5 years.
Okay.
And then when I came back, I said, okay, in 2006, I said, okay, now we should just try and at least make a record. Like we'll just write enough songs to do a record. We don't know if we're going to do a live band or not.
Yeah.
He plays the drum. He knows how to play the drums. I said I will play the bass because I actually play bass on all my demos. So so now we have a thing where we know how to sing all the parts, we know how to play all the guitars, and we know how to do the bass and drums. So we thought, much like Todd Rundgren, let's do it all
Yeah.
multi-track. And we got Alan Clapp from the Orange Peels, who had a
Good.
studio and is a producer. He agreed to let us record at his place, and we paid him a very under the amount that usually you would pay.
Sure.
And we went down there and we kind of made it all together, the three of us. And we went down. His studio is down in Sunnyvale, which is near where the new Apple spaceship campus is, right?
Yep.
So Silicon Valley features in this story, but some of the greatest days of my life were making this record down in Sunnyvale. And, we got to do everything. We got to play all the guitars. We got to do all the harmonies. We decided on the arrangements. We did all these things. I took the album cover photograph. Alan and I designed the album together. We attended the mastering sessions with, in San Francisco, in Oakland. And it was a completely handmade product, and we
Yeah.
decided that it needed a vinyl release. So we got a GoFundMe, thank you everyone, and we made a limited amount of vinyl with a gatefold sleeve and another photograph of mine on the inside, which is great.
Nice.
That's my other hobby lately has been photography. That's a whole I didn't even know I could do this, but I'm really enjoying it. So this record is it was out on CD as well as I think there's digital versions on Bandcamp and stuff like that. And so it was such a how do you call it a success? Because I don't think, if you know about it, you know about it, but it doesn't matter to me. This is back to that thing I said about Todd Rundgren.
Yeah.
This record is a beautiful piece of a complete thought, and I got to write all the lyrics too because John wasn't interested in writing lyrics. So I wrote real stories about my own, alcohol recovery and about having no confidence when I first moved away from home, and then realizing that it's the friends you meet along the way and all those kind of almost cliche things. But I
Sure.
wrote songs about real lived experience, and we called it Inner Sunset for a double meaning because we actually wrote all the songs at John Mormon's house in the inner Sunset section of San Francisco, just
Ah,
adjacent to Golden Gate Park. It's just actually south of Golden. It's on the park, but it's on the south side of Golden Gate Park. And inner Sunset also was kind of like the idea of inner emotional life and an inner, so and then we sequenced the album to be Inner Sunrise, you know, and then Inner Sunset at the end. And like the idea was it was a complete day, which okay, I've got to tell you, which was the original concept for Skylarking by XTC, produced by Todd Rundgren.
right.
So we nothing is wasted in my life. Every experience, everything I know goes into this thing, and so there's definitely an organic cyclical quality to all these things. And thank you again for listening to my TED Talk.
No, no. I just want to tell anybody, go stream it or find it, because it Inner Sunset, it's very sunny. It's just such a, I don't know how to say it, Paul. I heard so many different cool influences, and through the harmonies and the production. I even thought to myself at one part, and I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but I was like, I heard the Beau Brummels in that. I
Well,
don't
that's a San Francisco band too. So
Yeah,
yeah, so it's not unlikely.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
definitely
so
the
very
Alan
good.
Clapp's influence is very Beau Brummel, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, it's great. Oh man, we're running out of time. I want
Okay.
I want to do a part two. Maybe we will. But because I want to talk about Record Store Day
Okay.
podcast, and so quickly, how did it come about? Um, you know, I I'm a maven, right? I've got Record Store Day. I've got Pretenders live at the Paradise Theater, Boston, 1980. I think that was 2 years ago, Record Store Day release. And I've got an Iggy Pop live from Paris Record Store Day release. I'm a fan. I'm a maven. But how did the podcast come about?
Okay, well, that's another story of serendipity.
Yeah.
Because of the Todd Rundgren what's the word, scholarship, if you will, that I'm sort of known to fans of Todd Rundgren. They know that I wrote this book, so they've been very kind and supportive. And one of them is one of the founders of Record Store Day. And when Record Store Day were putting out a Todd Rundgren reissue,
Okay.
Michael Kurtz at Record Store Day, who was the co-founder along with Kerry Colleton, they Michael Kurtz contacted me to write all these liner notes and stuff. And then we were talking, and Michael's a really cool guy, and he's also really like the kind of guy who goes, I know this guy over here, he's got a van, so we're gonna put a van on the thing because he'll do that, and someone else can make soup. Like he's always trying to figure out how to pull together people,
Sure.
which is cool. So he said, "What do you want to do, man? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I've been trying for years to come up with the right idea for a podcast." And he goes, "Why don't you do one for us?" And I thought, well, I want it to be like where I interview musicians and people who
Yes.
make records. And he said, you could do that with us. And then somewhere along the line, we had a few meetings where it was discussed, oh, maybe it would be good to also, skew towards a retail, because the Record Store Day is a company. So Record Store Day started as a day of a
Yep.
bunch of record stores, like a guild getting together. Then they started making exclusive records for those days, working with record companies and stuff like that. So those limited reissues and rare B-side albums, that's a full-time job. Like they're working all year. And then
Yeah.
there are several events during the year that are not strictly on Record Store Day. And then they have Record Store Day Black Friday in November. So there's April and November,
Yep.
big Record Store Day actual store events. But then there's events all year round. So I said, why don't we do a thing where we talk to some retailers, who are part of the Record Store Day sort of chain or family or guild or whatever we're calling it, collective. And I will also have a featured interview with a musician. And that's kind of what I first came to do. But then I actually now really enjoy talking to stores because they're almost always really inspiring and nice people who, frankly, who would have gotten into a record store, owning a record store to become rich?
Right.
It's so these people they're doing it for love as well as trying to run a business, so they're
Yes.
small business people, which is a buzzword these days. And they're also, they're entrepreneurs, but they're also music lovers. And
Yes.
most of the people who run and work at record stores pretty much are doing it because they like to be around records. They like to be around music,
Yep.
and they have in stores, and they love the artists that come to do in stores. And so it's been really good for me. we were going every 2 weeks, and then we decided that there were so many interviews available at some point. Not all of them are like well known to everyone, but sometimes we can help be part of the chain of breaking people. We're still always looking for those massive A-list guests that everyone else gets as well, because who doesn't want that?
Sure.
But we managed to do it every week now. So it's we're in our fifth season. It's been a slow build, and it like I always say at the end of every episode, if you've enjoyed this podcast, tell your friends, because we love to make new friends. It's the whole point is, if you listen to the record, it's called the Record Store Day with Paul Myers, Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers. I did that so that they couldn't fire me. I
Gotcha.
decided that,
I
yeah,
thought that was wise.
it's not Jim Schwartz. It's not although lovely man Jim Schwartz. It's definitely the Paul Myers podcast. So but and we have Carrie Colleton from Record Store Day on frequently to talk about specifically things that she can address,
Yes.
and Michael's even been on the show, Kurtz. But and I've had Todd Rundgren on like 3 times, which is like, of course,
I
we
love
had
it. Yeah.
Ringo Starr on the show, which was for me, again, bringing it back to the conversation, the Beatles in my household. And Danny Harrison's been on the show. So it's like, we talked about having fathers from Liverpool. So,
Oh,
because I don't know if you know this, but Danny Harrison's dad is from Liverpool.
did
So,
not know that.
yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
known fact. So, and I had X on recently,
I was going to
John and
ask you
X.
about that. That was a
Yeah. I
great,
saw
great.
you're wearing a Billy Zoom t-shirt, so I was going to mention it.
Yes.
Yeah. We didn't
That
have Billy. We didn't have Billy. I guess Billy doesn't do press, but
he's an odd
I don't
bird.
see
He's an
him.
odd bird. That great Gretsch
I won't
sound.
say a word, but yes,
Yeah. Yes.
I'm a very left of center politically person. I would think that there are some people that don't want to talk to me probably, but
That's probably true. Yes. So we've got no time left, Paul. It's
well,
but it's been great. Can we go
no,
over a little
if
bit?
you're out of term, we can go over a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. Yeah. Let me throw to our segment we call Thank You or No Thank You, which you hold the reins. If you want to talk about these artists and give me a snippet or a comment, thank you or no thank you.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to start with some low hanging fruit, because some Canadian artists for you. The Guess Who.
Thank you. Am I playing the game right?
You are. Thank you and a comment. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So one of the first records I ever owned was a Guess Who single,
Okay.
called "Hand Me Down World."
Oh
It's
yeah.
not the first, but quick story. There was a Canadian record store. This is record store related.
There you go.
Canadian store chain called Sam the Record Man. And the Toronto store was the flagship store. It was a 3-story fun house of record, maybe 4 stories. I don't even know, but it was a multi-storied fun house of records in downtown Toronto. And it was owned by a man named Sam Snyderman, who's since departed, but he was, again, started that as a labor of love. It was his little Taj Mahal to his record loving wife,
Yes.
who was alive at the time. But, and then, they had a contest. If you bought a Guess Who record, it said in the ad, you get a Guess Who t-shirt. It was for the album Share the Land, and it had a Canadian nickel with the Guess Who written on it, like instead of Canada. And I said to my dad, "Can we go?" And he took me down to Sam the Record Man, because we lived in the suburbs, and I bought the single for Hand Me Down World, which is a song by the Guess Who. And the guy at the counter said, "Oh, you have to buy an album." And I said, my father actually, who's like really, he goes, he's English, and he goes, "Bloody does not say that. It says a record. Is a single a record?" And the guy said, "Well, we meant album." He goes, "But you didn't say it in the ad, right?" And then Sam Snyderman, beaming, standing
Sam.
behind,
Yep.
he saw this, and of course, customer is always right. He doesn't want any trouble. He comes over to me smiling and says, "Give the kid the t-shirt." Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
And I was like, "Oh my God, are you Sam Snyderman?" And I was so excited. And it was good for him too, because I
Sure.
was the kind of kid who knew that he's Sam the Record Man.
Yeah.
And this is a visual podcast, yes?
Yes.
Okay, here's a funny little connection to my life. That poster there says
Yep.
Wilco, right?
Yep.
That is in the style of the Sam the Record Man sign. Because
Oh.
when they played in Toronto,
Yep.
they were playing Massey Hall, and they have different silkscreen posters for different venues. That record over there is was what their storefront looked like. It was a neon record that the neon changed colors so that it would look like it was spinning,
Oh,
and that
nice.
the Wilco lettering would have been the word Sam. And so when I had Michael Jorgensen of Wilco on the show,
Yep.
later sent me this signed poster from all the guys in Wilco, but it's because it's my hometown record store from my youth. I put it on my wall behind me.
How fun.
So
That's
that was my
awesome.
Guess Who. That was my thank you for the Guess Who.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you. No, thank you. The Pursuit of Happiness.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
When I first started the Gravelberries, we were playing around the Toronto area, and they had just moved into town from out west, Canadian, and they also liked Todd Rundgren. And at one point, I heard the influence in their music, and then they got a record deal that they were produced by Todd Rundgren.
Right.
So they're in my book about Todd Rundgren, but they were the local band that got to be produced by Todd Rundgren. And Mo Berg is still a friend of mine. Actually, the whole band are still friends of mine. And when we played shows together, they would they would talk to me, and they taught me. Mo taught me how to play songs by the Pursuit of Happiness, like hand to hand, showing me. And
Fun.
the the vibe that I got from those guys,
Yeah.
all of them, Chris Abbott, the guitar player, they were such good people that to this day they're very good friends of
Your
mine, and
friends.
I'm always cheering on their projects. And
Oh, Paul,
yeah,
get
yeah.
get them get them to find somebody who can promote them here in the States. We need them to come down and play. It's been forever. I think the last time they came through, they were touring on a reissue or something. They opened up for Echo and the Bunnymen
Right.
and on a mini tour, I guess. But they're so fun, and I'm tempted to drive up to I think the closest they got to me probably was Toronto or maybe London, Ontario. But
Yeah,
great
they
live band.
haven't really been doing new albums or anything, but I mean they did a re-recording, I guess, of some stuff acoustically or something, but they tend to just play like, a festival circuit of
Yep.
summer fair type circuit. And they're all doing other projects. And Mo was actually in a super group with other Canadian musicians called the Trans Canada Highwaymen, with
Yes.
Craig from Oates, Chris from Sloan, and Stephen Page from Barenaked Ladies. This
Barenaked
conversation is
Ladies.
very cyclical. There's lots of things recurring. So,
Yeah. I'd
so
like to
yes,
see them.
thank you, Pursuit of Happiness
Thank you,
from
Pursuit of
me.
Happiness.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
So this next one, we cheated on it because you talked about it earlier on. But I want to tell you a story about how I discovered this great artist that you mentioned. Thank you or no thank you, Ron Sexsmith. And
Thank you
I
very
had
much.
yeah, I came on to Ron Sexsmith through Nick Lowe talking about Ron Sexsmith
Right.
and then heard his music. And then, as we do sometimes, found a cover of Ron doing Jerry Rafferty's Right Down the Line at a tribute
Right.
concert for Jerry Rafferty in Ireland. Friend Ron Sexsmith and saw him locally at a very small club, like a 200 seater in Ann Arbor. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful musician that not enough people know about. So, talk a bit about Ron.
Well, okay, so you know that one of the reasons that I'm a professional writer is that I was allowed to write about Ron Sexsmith for the Globe and Mail,
Yeah,
and he was just a massive, clearly better than all of us in the Toronto songwriting community.
yes.
And his pedigree was, he listened to people like Bill Withers and Jerry Rafferty, and but odd things like was it Charlie Rich,
Mm.
like you wouldn't expect, and but he had that honey voice, like
Oh,
kind of sings like this, he's like, and I'm not surprised he would do Jerry Rafferty, just because that's kind of what he does. Um,
beautiful.
the thing that always drives him crazy is that everybody who loves him often says, why isn't he well known? Why isn't he famous? And he sort of pointed out to me, he's been on our show twice now.
Okay.
He sort of pointed out to me that it's kind of a drag to be famous for not being famous. He'd rather people just talk about, whether they liked him or not how frustrated they are that he, isn't like a household name. Like,
Right.
I'll tell you, every songwriter that I admire loves Ron Sexsmith. Elvis Costello loves, Emmylou Harris loves him. Lucinda Williams loves him. Like, if you, most people, it's like Harry Nilsson. It's like one
Yes.
of those things where every great songwriter loves Harry Nilsson that I
Yes.
know, and Harry Nilsson might not be as well known. I mean, they might know three songs of his, but they don't know just how great Harry Nilsson was, but every so often I remind them. So that's
Yeah.
with Ron Sexsmith. Again, with Ron, let's just talk about how great he is, and let's
He's
not let's
great.
not let's not dwell on how unknown he is.
Never, never. No, he's great, and I'll promote him as much as I can to my ten listeners. Um, let's do a couple more.
Okay.
You'll laugh at this one because we're still in Canada. April Wine.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. They were the early April Wine had hits on the radio in Canada. They did a cover I didn't know was a cover at the time of Hot Chocolate's "You Could Have Been a Lady," which was
Mm,
such a great song with a great hook.
yeah,
And a real I could only act it out with my mouth, but it's the that sound. And it was just when you're a kid learning guitar, that was great. And I thought Miles Goodwin had a really smooth, sort of pop friendly voice. And then they did a Bad Side of the Moon, which was a I didn't know at the time was an Elton John song when I was a
mm.
kid, and they had and then they had later hits like Ooh What a Night, which was such a great rock song. And was it
Their big
was it
hit was "Sign of the Gypsy Queen," I think.
which is funny because
Yeah,
that's not my favorite era for
yeah,
them at all.
yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, they kind of got known as a party band after a while, and
Hmm.
I think in America they were like on the same tip as Pat Travers or something.
Right, right,
They would be like third on the bill with Cheap Trick and Motley Crue or something.
right, right.
Like they're the band that goes on for like 45 minutes in America, where the other band's a headliner. And
Unfortunately, yeah,
well, this is the story. But Miles passed away just last year,
I
and I
saw
know
that.
that he was speaking of bitterness. I guess that there are stories about him being very vocal about how he felt mistreated by the Canadian industry, but full circle, the
Mm.
Trans Canada Highwaymen covered an April Wine song on their covers album that they just did, so that's cool.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Um, cool. All right, we're gonna go a couple more minutes. You you interviewed them for the Todd book, but the Furs, Psychedelic Furs. We lost Mars Williams last year in that band, and yeah, thank you or no thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'll tell you, Psychedelic Furs, first three albums, maybe four. Okay, so there's the debut album, Talk Talk Talk, and then sorry, Forever Now.
Yes.
And then probably the one Mirror Moves after that. Those albums um were like great albums. Like those were
Yes.
like you like Heaven is the whole of our hearts, like Ghost in You,
Hit after
just
hit.
yeah. I mean, he took this Bowie thing,
Hmm.
the vocally, but I always love that all his songs seem to involve spitting out the word love, and rain,
Yeah.
love and rain. You could probably write a song called Love Rain, and it would be a Psychedelic Furs song. Um, I thought Richard Butler, I was expecting him to be a really sarcastic person. He was a warm, funny,
Really?
like, we had him on the show. He was very funny, and he's a great fine art painter. Have you seen what he does?
No.
I think his account on Instagram is RB Loft House, like LOFTHOUSA. So RB being Richard Butler.
Okay.
It's RB Lofthouse, and if you look it up, he does these very impressionistic sort of faceless faces and lots of brush strokes, and he's a very dark painter, and I really like his work. But the Psychedelic Furs get to tour regularly.
Yes.
I think they just did a tour last year with Squeeze opening for them, so it was kind of like
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm actually um yeah. It was the only thing about Psychedelic Furs is when I interviewed them, they sent me a recording from their end, and I had done this thing where, as you can tell, I talk a lot, and the interview had gone on very long.
Right.
And when it was over, they didn't edit out the part afterwards when Richard said, "Gee, I didn't think that was ever going to stop." Like
Ah.
it was like, so I got to hear that maybe I'd gone too long for him. Like I guess he thought it was going to be 30 minutes and it was 45 or something.
Oh,
But
that's funny.
just on the corollary,
Yeah.
Lucinda Williams, we had on the show, and she
Yep.
recorded her end. And at the end of it, I heard her say, "I love that guy." So it was
Oh,
good. It was nice to hear "I love that guy" in that southern accent of hers. So
I
like I think she's from the New Orleans area or something.
I
It's so
heard that
nice.
interview with her and it was great. And I want to give you props too. Um, to it was interesting. You just had on the oh, I'm losing my mind. The box tops. Help me out, Paul.
Oh yeah, we're talking about Big Star. Yeah,
Thank you. The
we're
Big
talking
Star
with
Quintet.
Jody Stevens, was the original member of Big Star with Mike Mills and Pat Sansone from Wilco and John
Yeah.
Auer from the Posies. Yeah.
So another artist that you and the pe- people found out about afterward, right? And
Yeah,
has
yeah,
gained
yeah.
this notoriety. And it was such a nice interview because all of the guys in this band who grew up with with Big Star or learning about Big Star, hearing the music or loving it through finding it through the replacements or otherwise, it was just such
Yeah.
a great indicator of how music is shared. Somebody talks about it and you got to listen to this and then all of a sudden, but that was great.
Thank
uh
you.
you're welcome. um Not enough time. Let's finish up with one last one, and maybe we can do this again. um Thank you, no thank you, Warren Zevon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, there hasn't been a no thank you yet, but Warren Zevon introduced me to a kind of sardonic lyric,
Mm,
by which I mean, on the one hand, it's about one thing, but when you listen closely, it's about another thing.
hmm.
Um, Even more dark than Randy Newman. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
but in the same way that you're not sure what the guy's really saying, and then all of a sudden it hits you, and like,
Yes.
but just talk. I mean, I had the guys who played on those records on my show recently too. The Immediate Family, a session
Yeah.
group with Waddy Wachtel, Leland Sklar, Russ Kunkel, and Danny Korchmar, and
My
um,
favorites.
and if
Yeah.
you listen to those records that they made together, like Johnny Strikes Up the Band is all of those guys,
Yeah.
and just that, I'm so tempted to do impressions, but the way he sings, he's got that, it's a husky sort of forced into the microphone thing, and it's just so demanding. He's so in your
Yes.
face. And then who could forget that interview when he knew he was dying and he goes on David Letterman, and David Letterman's a huge fan, has had him on several times, and then he says to him, thinking probably this is the last time he'll have him on the show because he's gonna die. He says, "What have you learned about life?" And Warren, you probably know this story.
I do,
Warren
but tell
says,
my listeners.
I would tell people to enjoy every sandwich. Enjoy every sandwich. I mean, of course, it could mean any kind of thing but the pleasure of eating a good sandwich. I mean, even if you're not going to die, like today,
Yes.
I have taken that to heart. Honest to God, I will eat a Cara Cara orange. I'm being very specific about the brand, or a Fuji apple, and I will
Yes.
taste every bite of that thing, and I'll go, thank you. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but whatever creation caused this to happen
Yes.
in this life. And thank you to Warren Zevon. So thank you very much, Warren Zevon. You
Well,
know,
well said, Paul. Well, it's come to that time. So at the end of the show, I do some thank yous and I do some disclaimers, just to keep people right. And so I'm going to do that before we say thank you to you, Paul, and say goodbye for now. And so, and I thank you. Thanks the Myers family for bringing us Paul and all other relevant Myers. Um,
you mean,
and
by
I
which you mean
thank,
Peter and Mike? Yes. Yeah.
oh, there you go, your brothers. And I thank you show is certified as grass fed. 4 out of 5 boiler operators recommend And I Thank You show. And I Thank You show airs on Armed Forces Network and is heavily redacted. And I Thank You show is commonly used for adult sedation in medical settings. And I Thank You show is not recommended for people who sit on expansion bridges. And finally, guests appear courtesy of themselves and are apologized to after the show. So I'm going to put a whole bunch of stuff about Paul and where you can find him and the Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers in the show notes. So you can get exposed to everything about Paul, including The Paul and John, which put out that great album, which everybody should listen to and stream. And I Thank You show. And Paul, again, in the Twitterverse can be found at, and in threads, at Pull My Ears, Pull My EARS. And I Thank You is a production of Arthur Street Weirdos, written by yours truly. Theme music is by Royalty Free. Brand creative by Brad Lutz. If you're consuming this via Apple Podcasts, thanks for rating and reviewing. 5 stars is nice, even if inaccurate. If you're watching this video on the YouTubes, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. All of this will help people find us so they can waste their valuable time. Comments can be shared at andithankyouShow@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Paul, thanks so much for agreeing to come on our meager little show. And I look forward to everybody discovering the Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers and getting your books and reading them and enjoying your awesome writing and content. So thanks.
And I thank you.
Yeah, thank you.